Finally, we just have to bring our chairs on for our short panel discussion. Time has sort of been whizzing by, I think. But I would just mention that after this session ends, if any of you are interested, you might want to make your way towards the Raphael Galleries or indeed to the South Asian area, because there will be also some more live performance that you can catch. As I said, this is all part of our performance festival, which happens at the Victoria and Albert Museum every year, conditions permitting, at this time. So usually it's late April. The timing always coincides with Shakespeare's birthday. So the 23rd of April is our anchor point. Okay, I'm going to get started because I know we don't have very long, and if anybody's got questions from the floor, we would like to have some time to sort of take those. Here's our star. So Pratima, who made the film, who is instrumental behind this whole event, and who choreographed that last rather charming piece of dance. So thank you very much. And I want to begin really with you, if you've got some energy still. So about really how, don't worry, up there will have to deal with it, about really how the project came into being, and the challenges you faced as you were putting it together.
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you everyone for being here on a Sunday afternoon, being at a bank holiday as well. So thanks so much. We really appreciate you being with us today. And thank you, panelists, Sangeeta Di, Bisakha Di, Piali Di, Cary. And thank you, V&A, for bringing us as a part of the Performance Festival. And thank you, Jane, for all of that, being in the film and inviting us today. So thanks all. And to go back to the story of the film and the whole heritage project, how it came about. Well, firstly, as you've seen, I dance, so it is a part of my personal journey. I've learned this style of dance from a very young age, and I was always very intrigued by the narrative of how Uday Shankar and Anna Pavlova, two people, so many years ago, they came together, they collaborated, and they shared. So apart from just learning the dance, teaching, and choreographing, it was also important for me to know the story behind it. And of course, through my research, when I came to know about the story, I felt it was a very, very important part of our cultural history that needed to come in the forefront, and we had to share it with the current generation and the younger generation moving forward. And of course, the other thing that I found really interesting about this story is that when we talk about classical dance forms, it's something that none of us in our generation have really seen grow, develop, flourish, because this was centuries back. Whereas this is a heritage that is not long ago, even though it was 100 years back, we get to see and understand how it developed from where it started. So this is, I think, a unique experience for us, that we get to see a dance form coming into life through a collaborative process. So these were the reasons how and why I came and thought about making the film. And of course, when I thought about making the film, the idea was to also share the dance form with the younger generation in the country, in the place that I live and work. So that is how the whole heritage project started. And talking about the challenges, of course, first to gather my own thoughts and understanding as to how I would take the story to people, approach and bring together a team who would believe in my dream and in my mission. And eventually I was successful, and moving forward, when the project and the film gradually started taking shape, that was the time when I actually forgot the challenges. And the entire journey has been very fascinating and very rewarding, with people helping us and Heritage Lottery funds stepping in to fund us and support us. And I have been surrounded by pillars of support, like Piali Ray, who has been my mentor throughout the project. I had Bisakha Di, with whom I would pick up the phone, and for hours I would just want to hear about Uday Shankar, because she's one of the people who has worked very closely with him. So that was very interesting, just to listen to the process of how he would work, how he would think, because we've never seen him. So Bisakha Di was a connect between the two. And then, of course, Sangeeta Di is here, with whom she was the first person with whom I shared the idea of the film, knowing that she's a film expert. And there were lots of ideas and information and discussions shared. And of course, we've got Cary here today who can share further. So thanks very much. So that was my journey. That is how the film came about. That was the whole heritage project that you have seen with Trinity Laban. And I was really grateful, when Trinity Laban invited us to do the heritage project. And I think that was one of the biggest live experiences of sharing that I had with somebody or with a group of young people who were never exposed to any form of Indian dance. So it was not just teaching, it was also learning in the process how to make the teaching easy and to break it down so you can pass it on to the next generation in a way that you not only just teach, but you create something really new in the process. And that was also a fascinating and rewarding experience I've had. Thank you.
Okay, so Piali Ray, we've just learnt were the mentor for this project. Would you like to talk a little bit about your involvement and how you became the mentor?
The phone calls. I have to apologize for my voice. It keeps disappearing. I don't know why. Because I was, of course, as Pratima said, and all of us, we have this connect with Uday Shankar. I come from the school as well. I've learned from Amula Shankar. Spent many hours with Uday Shankar, not as the Uday Shankar, but as Momo's dad, my friend's father. So I saw Kalpuna with him. So now I think back and I realize what a privilege that was. Coming to this film, endless hours of phone calls, really, and understanding how the story needs to be told. Because it was to connect with the present audience, with people like yourselves, and to have an understanding of the root of that storyline. So how to make that connect between the past and the present, and to understand the impact of it. So that was a framework, and we really talked through it. We spoke with many, many, many people, had many friends who joined in. Akram generously gave his time. So many of them very generously put their time in. And I feel that it was a privilege to have worked on this film. It's part of like a pilgrimage for me, it was. And for all of us, I think it feels like we've received so much. And this is a little bit that we can do and should do to preserve this heritage, to recognize the heritage of this amazing personality. And of course, Anna Pavlova's contribution is immense, because she saw something that gave, that seed grew into this huge banyan tree that we are all part of. And I think she took the risk, and she took the challenge that we really should be very grateful for.
Thank you. If we could move on to Bisakha Sarker. So you also knew Uday Shankar. So how do you feel about seeing these sort of projects coming to keep his work alive?
Very emotional. Takes me back to the days when we were with them. It really is absolutely wonderful. So, I see not only Uday Shankar, Amula Shankar, from whom we actually learned how to appreciate Uday Shankar and his contribution. She actually taught us how to love him and how to look at his work, how to analyze it. So it's extremely emotional in that way. And I was just sitting there thinking that how much these Shankar wives are contributing to keep the Shankar legacy. Amula Shankar is a shining example. Throughout her life, she has tried to promote this style, to make people believe in this style. And as you mentioned in the film, that she did it till she was almost 100. And it is really for her that you see 3 generations of Uday Shankar style students coming here. When I was in the school, Piali was just a young little student doing there. And then by the time they grew up, Piali and Tanushree together, they had Pratima. So I never realized that there is this continuity. We see that in classical dance, and I have never really thought about it, that there is a legacy. And in more recent years, we see how Shukarna Shankar is keeping Ravi Shankar's legacy, and Tanushree. You have seen how beautifully she has brought it to all the Laban students. So it was really kind of an eye-opener seeing it in this context, seeing it through the confinement of a film to actually understand how the legacy is going. You know, that's really wonderful. And the personal connection, all those things really do come in. Both of them really took us, not only as students, as Piali said, you know, hours we have spent, and having the advantage of seeing Kalpana in a small theater in their house. They had a little screening thing, and just sitting next to these 2 great people and watching it then. I think what I was excited about it is that this is a film that Satyajit Ray had seen 19 or 17 times before he made Pathar Pachali. And I also remember asking Dada, as we called Uday Shankar, must be copying Ravi Shankar, who called him Big Brother or Dada, kind of almost asking him, why did you do that? Or sometimes in the class we will tell Amuladi that, you know, quoting lines from the film that, can you really laugh like that? Ha ha ha, you know, all those things. You know, how easy was those days, and it really brings that, you know, that is my sort of personal feeling with that. But what I really wanted to tell you about, which is maybe not in the film, is Uday Shankar's fascination with new technology, how all the time he has used that. I first time saw strobe lighting in his Prakriti Ananda many, many years back in Calcutta. I have never seen it before that. And then in his piece, Shankar Scope, he brought in the live screen, a film screen, and live performance together, which was really many, many years back. And but even before that, something that he did, which value I realize now, is his Ram Lila, story from Raman, but it was a shadow play. It was not the performers on the stage. It was really a precursor to the big concerts that we see these days, with large video screens, bringing out what is happening in the small scale in the stage. We didn't have those big screens or those facilities, so it was a performance in a large-scale venue. So what he did to make those small figures on the stage visible to a large gathering in an open-air field, really. They took it and had the advantage of seeing that. So the performers performed behind a white screen, and you see the show only through the shadows moving. And just to give you a proper flavor of what's happening, all the performers in their full costume walked through the audience. So when you're seeing them in black and white, you can imagine how they're dressed up. I think it was, now I realize what an wonderful creative thinking that was. And these are the things that we have seen, and we saw how much he loved it. But he was also a member of Magic Circle. So magic was, he was fascinated with that. And one thing I remember, which is what he told me, I suddenly remember almost sitting in his room, hearing this story, something that he wanted to do, but it didn't happen then. He wanted to give an interpretation of Tagore's poem Jhulon. Ami poraner sathe khelibo ajike jhulono khela ratri bela. The poem is about a romantic thought about death. To see death as coming as a knight in shining armor to sweep me away. So I'll elope with death, who will come to me in a white horse. And he said that, I want to do that, and you will all see the white horse on the stage. Now I think what he meant is maybe using some kind of laser technique. He had it in mind. It hasn't happened, but I really still remember that and kind of, really imagine how wonderful it could have been. So I think I rest my case.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to hear these recollections and interpretations. So if we move on to Sangeeta Datta, you're involved in the film world, I believe, so perhaps we could sort of talk about the significance of Uday Shankar and film and the ongoing impact that that does create.
Sure. I was sitting here watching this film the second time or the third time. One, I have to say that the projection facilities here just make this so magical, such a beautiful projection and images that we saw here. And I was just thinking, thank God for Kalpana. Thank God you had this film, and there's so much of it used in the documentary, and for all other researchers who watch Uday Shankar techniques, because it's this huge archival repository, really, for his work. Very few other dancers of that time would have had this sort of archival material documented. So that itself is just fantastic. And just to put this very briefly in context, this film, as I said in the film as well, Kalpana was autobiographical. It had that whole idea of a young artist and his wife who want to start an arts institution and the challenges that they face, and then finally they set up this institution. That's the story of Kalpana. That's also the story of the school that they set up up in the hills near the Himalayas a few years before that, and the school which closed during the war years. So a lot of that was drawn into this film. But giving just getting a sense broadly about what was happening in Indian cinema at that time. How did Uday Shankar, who was hugely fascinated with cinema, who was fascinated with technology, as you said, a lot of other people then, like Rabindranath Tagore, even before him, were fascinated with cinema, and they had already prophesied that in the next century, this would be the media. This would be the medium through which arts would be transported and communicated. So at that time when Uday Shankar made this film, and he made it in the studios in Madras, in Chennai, the Gemini Studios, which is a very big studio, mainstream studio. And in a lot of, cinema in India is so old, it's from the turn of the century that we've had documentaries and silent films, and then by 1935 the talkies came in, and as soon as the talkies came in, music came in and dance came in, and most of our leading ladies were trained classical dancers because they had to have that flair and talent for performance. And we had the playback singers, of course, who came later on. But in this whole milieu, when Uday Shankar makes this film, it's also that moment of independence. It's about a new nation. And the dream that one artist holds about setting up a cultural institution, in a way, is symbolic of the artistic vision in a new nation, the way our Prime Minister Nehru had given that sort of focus on culture, had talked about unity and diversity, had talked about really looking around the entire vastness of India to see what cultural roots we held. And in a way, in Kalpana, it is that sort of showcasing of regional dance forms, of regional music, and trying to sort of bring it all together through this one troupe or this one company. And Uday Shankar, with his early exposure to world artists, to international work, the sort of, having William Rothenstein on one side and Royal College of Art, and then Anna Pavlova, who actually gives him that sense of self-pride, says, don't stay here in the West and learn other things, go back to India and develop your own work which is based in your roots. I mean, that itself, at a pre-independence time when nationalism is already so strong in India, within that, it must have had a huge impact on somebody like Uday Shankar. Sorry, I could go on, but that's the sort of context.
That's all right. I'm sorry we don't have longer to have this discussion, but finally I would like to bring in Cary Sawhney. You are in work with film and promote films. So how do you feel about this new film, and what do you see as its future?
It's great to see the film. I'm director of the London Indian Film Festival here, and it's also evocative makes me think about how that process of the time of the 1920s, 1910s, when British culture, for example, the Empire, didn't really encourage Indian arts and stuff, it's particularly in India, and about how that independence movement brought about an encouragement of arts, but also filmmakers artists from all over Europe were working with Indians, and particularly Bengalis are going out around Europe. And actually, for example, in UFA Studios, for example, there was Bengalis working in UFA Studios in Weimar, Berlin. You can see probably the lighting is, to me, is very evocative of German expressionism, that kind of lighting and the culture, and that all that kind of massive cultural interchange taking place in the 1910s, 1920s. For example, Himanshu Rai, who was a great impresario and filmmaker of that time, was also a good friend of Anna Pavlova, for example. So there's that kind of amazing different cultural discourses going backwards and forwards between the arts, cinema, and also taking taking arts from a not a British perspective. Obviously, the British were the dominant culture of in charge of India at that time, but also other like Germans and Russians, and all interchanging with India in a different way. And India was seen as exotic, or the culture was seen as exotic for a Western milieu. But at the same time, there was that appreciation of arts and culture, which was something different, something ancient in civilization. And that kind of, and you see the kind of birth of cinema, for example, with Falke and the early mythological films, which bring about that first kind of scenes of dance in mythological films, and to see that kind of then progress through culture and how that dance form was kind of intertwined with cinema in many ways. For me, that was quite fascinating to watch that and muse about those things. But I think the Bengali contribution towards Indian culture is kind of reviving that kind of culture and nationalism has been fundamental.
Right. Well, I think we do have to, a very short time, if anybody has got a question from the audience that they would like to, there should be a microphone somewhere. I'm sorry, we can't really see you. The usual problem, but I always say do a bit of choreography if you want to attract attention.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. It's Suman Butcher. I have loads of questions. I'm gonna say I enjoyed watching it and learning about the collaboration between Uday Shankar and Pavlova. I wanted to know that is the dance form written down kind of thing, or is it just being taught by Tanushri and Mamta? And then in terms of the music that you used in the film for the Kartikya thing, was that original music to the original thing, or was it new music that was composed? Okay. But my main thing I wanted to know was when the voiceover guy was saying with this group of Hindu dancers, I slightly got annoyed with that. I could see that the publicity material said all that. But, I mean, I know Zora Sehgal was in Uday Shankar's dance troupe, and I wouldn't know if she was happy to call herself a Hindu dancer. Why didn't you just correct it, if you know what I mean? So these are some of my questions. I have loads more, but thank you for this.
So to answer the first question, well, thank you very much for being here today and, picking up those points, which allows us to discuss certain things further and bring more clarity. So sorry, what was the first question, if you can? The dance is not notated. It's passed down, and when we say whether it's Tanushree Shankar and Mamata Shankar, that's not the only school or teaching that is going on in India and around. There are loads of other schools, there are loads of other choreographers, dancers. Some of the people who have worked with Uday Shankar are still around. And if Bisakha tells us the names of some of them who are still working in India, Piali, you would know. So there are loads of them, who are still working in India. And because it's a creative style and Uday Shankar's dance is more of a philosophy, it's not confined within certain limits of creativity. So we are allowed to create, keeping the basic philosophy of Uday Shankar alive. So therefore, it's a flowing style, which so many people, so many dancers in India, they have taken it to the next level in their own way, through their own creativity. So Tanushree and Mamata have been shown in this film because we wanted to keep it to a certain, parameter. We couldn't go beyond. But I would really loved to have spoken about everybody else who's carrying this work forward. So that's the answer to the first question. And then we were talking about...
Did you use the same music?
Yes. The music is original. So we worked really hard between Tanushree and myself. We extracted the music out of Kalpana just so it had, the real original feel. And it's not worked upon. We have not cleaned the music. We have used it exactly the way it is. But the piece that we did at Trinity Laban in 2018 was a long 15 minutes piece, but the music of Kartikya is only about 3.5 minutes. So we had to bring something in, and that is where Ananda Shankar comes in, Uday Shankar's son and Tanushree Shankar's husband. So the 15 minutes music is coming together of Kartikya's original music, and the remaining was Ananda Shankar's music, Nrityanjali, and there was, another piece called Himalaya. So those three musics put together, we created the long 15 minutes piece. So we just had to cheat a little bit because Kartikya was only 3.5 minutes, and we had to create a 15 minutes piece. So that was the second question. And moving on. Well, we tried to, yeah, exactly. That's the original name of the company that Uday Shankar himself came up with. And we wanted to stick to, stay as close to history as possible. So, we didn't feel the need of renaming the group to something different because that was the original name Uday Shankar came up with. Well, Hindu at that point came from the term Hindustan. So we were talking about the country, and I think that is what Uday Shankar also had in mind. I don't think it was to do with religion or, personal beliefs and tastes. It was more about a creative person who came forward who wanted to represent his country, and that is exactly what he was doing. So instead of saying India, I guess he wanted to just name it and have an Indian name for it. And instead of calling it maybe Hindustan or something, he would have just said, a group of Hindu dancers, just to cut it short. That is my interpretation.
It was a term that was used very widely at the time.
Yeah.
So it's not... Yes,
Okay,
thank
sure.
you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely keep that in mind. And if we get a chance to rework, we will look at it. Thanks very much.
Actually, it's very obvious Hindu words you picked up that, but what perhaps was not clear is the name of his organization. It was called Uday Shankar India Culture Center. Many people think it's a wrong grammatical mistake, that it should be Uday Shankar Indian Culture Center, but he specially called it India, that it's not only for Indian people, it's for everyone to use some Indian art and culture that's coming from India. So it was really as wide as that. So definitely religious differences were not something that he intended.
We do have another question there.
Hi, thank you very much, first of all, for this fantastic film. Don't want to take too much time, but I was very curious to know that how much Indian dance community in UK promoting folk dances of India, are we still stuck with Kathak, Bharatanatyam, Odissi, or other classical dances of India, or are we trying to also promote or pass it to next generation, the folk dances of India? And it was so fascinating that how Uday Shankar was so involved and went to Rajasthan and Nagaland and other parts of India. So,
well, thank you. That's a very good question. I think when we look at Uday Shankar's work, we talk a lot about folk in it anyway. So that is my way of thinking about folk in my work, and maybe moving forward, that is something I could look at as to how we can work on the folk dances of India. But when you talk about if there's anybody else working on, folk dances, I mean, that is something we would really like to know. I mean, that's a question to me as well. I mean, I have not come across many people who work solely with Indian folk, but I'm sure, there are times in dance festivals and festivals across the UK when artists from India are invited and they come and teach, different forms of Indian dance, martial art forms, folk dances. But so to speak, to answer your question, I'm not aware myself if there is anything going on with folk at this time, currently, in the UK. I don't know if Piali di, Sangeeta di, and Bisakha di, or anybody from the audience knows about, folk practice going on.
Yeah. I mean, in certain ways, it depends on the communities who are here. So like Garba is a folk dance form, Garba, Dandiya Ras, or Bhangra. They are folk-rooted, and they are very widely practiced, very popular, very well-known. And then you do have certain cultural forms. So depending on it's what should I say, immigration pattern into it, like who has come, who has that knowledge base. So someone like Geeta here would know maybe some South Indian folk dances. I know Chitralekha in the Midlands, she does teach the Kerala folk dances. So it depends on who has that knowledge base to spread it. It needs to be done well. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of folk dance in India, isn't it? So it depends on who knows. Even in India, it differs from region to region, so not everybody will know every dance. But there's some. I think we should do more. It's beautiful, of course.
I think
we always put so much efforts on classical.
Yeah.
I always question that, why nobody appreciates my...
Oh, you do? You do folk? Oh. Okay. We should see it. Yes.
So yeah, and we never see it on stage. Of course we practice. We do Garba every Navratri. But how much do we see it on stage? That's my question.
I think that is what your question is, to come out of the celebration mode to a professional presentation mode.
Yeah. But folk is rooted in...
Just to make a point, we do see folk dances as well, and many people teach it as well, especially that Piali said, often at a community level, but there is a lot of folk dances. But what the point I would like to make is that Uday Shankar culture, Uday Shankar style of dancing is not a folk dance. It's more of, I call it classical dance, because it's not one of the named classical styles, but it has the similar classicism in it. It hasn't got a written academic base, so maybe it's a bit hard to compare it with classical dances. And also it hasn't got an amalgam or a pathway to go from one piece to another to show the progression. So those are the problems or lacking in the style. But the style has got, the aesthetics is same as the classical Indian dance. I practice the Shankar style of dancing, Indian creative dance, and I have to explain it to people in so many words. What do? You dance about this deer and the birds, and it's like that. True, there isn't a proper recognition of a contemporary style of Indian dancing. And like my friend Sanjeevani said that, no, Bisakha doesn't dance amalgam, or she has not been handed over a dance. There are few dances, and mostly recorded in Kalpana, which were handed down. But if it is a creative style, then the main interesting thing in it is that you create. So every time I want to dance something, I have to make my own dances. And in that respect, somebody asked about the music. No, we do not, at least I do not dance to the Uday Shankar's original music or the old music or the content. One of the very, very important things that he introduced to use different content. They're not all mythological stories about gods and goddesses or kings. So that actually gave us a permission to dance about anything we want, to particle science, to Jataka stories.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap up this session. Now, I can see that we could go on for hours, and it's been a real privilege, both being able to screen the film, to discuss it, to see some dancing, and I think it is very important that events like this do take place in museums such as the Victoria and Albert. We do like to bring our work to life. We love putting on performances in the museum, and I think this afternoon has suggested there's a great deal more that we can do. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to all my panellists and dancers.